Haven't already, I'm sure most of you have, but if you haven't already, I do suggest you take a minute at some point today to walk along the path at the side of this place. And you'll almost certainly hear the dogs barking. You'll hear the reason that we're all here, the reason that Camp Beagle exists, and really the reason that my book exists. And I won't ask you to hold a minute's silence right now, because I think for most of us, those screams are already engraved firmly into our hearts. And honestly, revolutions don't happen in moments of silence. They happen when our cries for freedom echo theirs. When we finally decide that enough is enough, and we step up, we step forward, we swallow our excuses, and when we look to either side, we desperately hope that others have joined us. And when they do, academics call those the moments of whirlwind. Those points in history when the air begins to buzz and radical and revolutionary change begins to feel inevitable. So what I am going to ask of you is that when you leave here, hopefully with a copy of my book, is that you do take that moment to think about these dogs and all victims of human oppression. But you also take a moment to think about what actions you could take, or what actions you could continue to take, to ensure that you're preparing yourselves and our movement for the next whirlwind. So, sorry, I've got a sore throat at the minute, and I'm just struggling through that a little. But I want to talk, obviously, about my book. But before I get onto that, I just want to talk about our movement and how can we prepare for that whirlwind. And for me, and my experience, and through research in the book, it's very clear that all successful social movements rely on a solid foundation. And ours has always been our local group network. These are the autonomous collectives of activists and individuals in every town or city across the country who organize outreaches, regular meetings, and those protests against local targets that can grow into national campaigns. And I know that that ground level, that grassroots organizing isn't always particularly exciting or glamorous, but it is the lifeblood of our movement. It is the backbone of our movement, and it's how we learn and grow and develop and evolve. And we've proven before, I prove in my book, that when we have a solid local group network, and when we pull together behind a unified cause, we have a phenomenal power. It's the power to make billionaires cry, the power to make politicians lose sleep at night. Because while those people might seem like they have a power of their own that is insurmountable, born from incalculable wealth and nepotism and a willingness to resort to unaccountable violence, that does not make us powerless. Far from it. And that is something that we should never forget, and neither should they. Thank you, man. So of course I'm here to talk about my book, and to do that I really want to take you all right back to the beginning, to a grass verge somewhere in Huntingdon, where the local animal rights group was so horrified by undercover footage of egregious violence towards animals bred for the research industry that they erected a protest camp. Now I know this all sounds very familiar, but this was not 2021 and it was not this grass verge. The year was 1997 and the camp was set up outside of Europe's largest animal testing laboratory, Huntingdon Life Sciences. The camp had an incredible impact, and it inspired that local group network to hold satellite protests in solidarity the length and breadth of the UK. So that when the camp was finally and violently evicted, a new campaign emerged: Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty, or SHAC to our friends and our many, many enemies. And in those early days, SHAC must have seemed hopelessly optimistic. This ragtag group of activists boldly standing up and declaring to the world that we were going to take on a multinational company and we were going to close them down. No ifs or buts, no excuses, and certainly no compromises. But this wasn't just hubristic naivety, because when the undercover footage came out of Huntingdon Life Sciences, showing staff punching dogs in the face and cutting open live monkeys without anesthesia, combined with the pressure of the protest camp and the satellite actions it inspired, Huntingdon's share price had plummeted from well over £1 to barely a penny. And in a desperate financial situation, Huntingdon Life Sciences had borrowed £22 million from the NatWest Bank. So actually, to close this facility down, all we had to do was convince one bank to recall one loan. We gave ourselves 3 years to do it and achieved it in just one. But unfortunately, as those of you who were there at the time will remember, and the rest of you will learn in my book, that was barely the start of this story. Now, I don't want to give too many spoilers for the book, for those who don't know the story already, but I will say that when you open this book, when you read this book, you will be uncovering a remarkable chapter of modern history. You will learn how a British activist ended up in a Japanese prison, how an American teenager was blinded by the FBI inside Rikers Island, why a car park was flooded with Horlicks, high-speed police chases, police smashing down the walls of offices to arrest protesters locked inside, and the countless thousands of animals that were liberated from institutions like this across the world. And in researching this book, I interviewed more than 50 people, not just activists, but also academics, journalists, civil servants, undercover cops, professional spies. I uncovered secret government documents that were supposed to be heavily redacted and have never been read by anyone else. Documents which expose a sinister government conspiracy to eradicate our movement. And something I can promise all of you, even if you were involved in SHAC, no matter how deep in the action you were, there will be things in this book which will astonish and amaze you. There was certainly plenty of revelations for me as I researched it, and I served a 5-year prison sentence for helping coordinate this campaign. And that really brings me to why I felt compelled to write the book in the first place. Because I was far from the only person arrested or sent to prison for the SHAC campaign. In fact, compared to some of my friends, my sentence was light. And as they dragged us from our beds and threw us into jail, we also found that our voices were silenced. The police, the media, the government, they took our truth and our reality and distorted it into a perverse lie. They took actions that we had no knowledge of, that we played no part in, and that possibly never even happened, and used them to paint us as the bad guys, as the villains, completely ignoring the true victims in all of this. And at the same time, this laboratory who had broken the law hundreds of times, who had a criminal conviction for their violence towards non-human animals, and who thought nothing of torturing those same animals to death purely for profit. They held them up as the good guys, as the victims even. And these were lies that they screamed from tabloids, from headline news, and they are lies that have hung over my friends and I for 15 years. And it's probably no surprise that for me it felt beyond time to set the record straight, to explain exactly what happened here, what we really did and why we did it, and what they really did and why. But more than that, the SHAC campaign existed for 14 years. That was 14 years of blood, sweat and tears as we tried and tested countless protest tactics and strategies and developed a campaigning model that could be used to close any facility on Earth. This is knowledge that every progressive activist deserves to have. In my opinion, this is a book that every progressive activist should read so that we can learn those lessons, so that we can draw that inspiration and hopefully save ourselves a little of that blood, sweat and tears in the future. And finally, but by no means least, there are those true victims in this, the non-human animals bred in their countless thousands to be sacrificed at the altar of pseudoscience and tortured in nightmarish establishments like this. Establishments that thrive in secrecy behind razor wire and cameras and laws that imprison whistleblowers. When I started writing this book, it was before Camp Beagle existed, and my dearest hope with it was that we could help shine a little more light into places like this. And now the book is here, and so is Camp Beagle, and so are all of you doing amazing actions to help spread that light a little bit further. And I truly hope my book can help that process in some way. Thank you. So I just want to finish by thanking everybody that made this project possible, particularly the activists of SHAC who got up and inspired one another and inspired me to get up, to step forward, to swallow those excuses and throw ourselves time and again against the razor wire, the police batons, to be dragged from our homes and from the streets and thrown into police stations and prison cells across the world. I hope that when you read this book, you will be as inspired now as I was then. And I hope that you will draw those lessons and that inspiration, and that you will think about the actions that we can all be taking and continue to be taking to ensure that we aren't just waiting for the next whirlwind, but we're actively whipping up those winds ourselves.